Welcome again to the Gaming News Canada show presented by Beat Gaming. I'm your host, Steve McAllister. Last week, the highly anticipated decision came down from the Court of Appeal for Ontario that it is legal for online gamblers in the province's regulated market to play peer-to-peer games with players outside Canada. As Jeff Sacodny wrote on Covers.com, the decision may open the door for a return of daily fantasy sports and expanded online poker, although that could well be slow going given possible appeals and regulatory agreements. The Canadian Gaming Association called the court's majority opinion, quote, a significant victory for Ontario, bringing back a valuable option for consumers who enjoyed pool gaming activities, close quotes. For more on the decision and the CGA's reaction to it, along with some other matters of interest within the Canadian regulated gaming community these days, we welcome back to the podcast the President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association, Paul Burns. Paul, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Hey, Paul, I know there's not a whole lot you can say about the court ruling, given that, as we mentioned, that there is a possibility it will be appealed. But can you shine? I know the CGA put out a little bit longer statement from what I read last week. Can you just kind of give us, tell us what you can say at this time?
Yeah. No, I mean, we're pleased with the decision. Clear it was in a 4-1 decision. The court really accepted that the international liquidity was acceptable under the criminal code as the way it's written. We think that that was the right decision, and the arguments I think that were put forward were strong. I know I'm grateful for the team at McCarthy's and that led our intervention, but it was. I think it's a clear sign that for the anybody in Ontario right now, one is a better choice of product, but the reality is that everybody's still protected by the same regulatory regime, and everybody will still be covered by the same rules and the same consumer protection measures. And so, in reality, it's making the product better because of the nature of the way these pool products work. Bigger pools, more liquidity a player is helpful. It gives more choice to consumer, and so that's why we look at it from that perspective, and we think the court shared that. And so, yes, we're in appeal period. We're curious as if anybody will choose to pursue it to the Supreme Court, and then I guess if the court chooses to hear it. So we'll see that how it plays out. But I know obviously. iGaming Ontario was thrilled with the decision, as they now get to start to look at what liquidity can mean for operators in Ontario and players. So it was a nice, gave some very interesting case law. And I think that the judges were very thoughtful in how they determined it and the work they put into it.
Hey, Paul, this just for we do have listeners of the podcast that aren't don't have a ton of knowledge about the gaming industry. I mean, this ruling relates to beyond Canadian borders. Can you explain why it doesn't include provincial borders?
Well, there is a mechanism already for provincial liquidity, and that's why we have a lot of max 649. Often even some shared jackpot games and things like that across provincial jurisdictions. This was more about larger pools and reaching beyond, and it's because of the unregulated market in Canada. Canadians had and poker was clearly one of the leading product that in the online space for many years. Poker Stars, Full Tilt Poker, Paradise Poker, a lot of these sites really built a good strong business in Canada. That Canadians had international liquidity from the unregulated sites playing on the international sites, and obviously with Ontario's marketplace coming, that changed. And at the time, the government was wanting to get more clarity, and so this is the mechanism they chose, and before they decided, and fully supported the question and seeking the court's guidance, and they got it. And so it's I think for players, it's the poker business got very, very small very quickly in Ontario. And I think and I hear most from poker players. I heard a lot from the DFS industry. The DFS industry, there's other issues around the regulatory regime and oversight structure that probably needs more work. But I think poker will see one of the most immediate benefits from this once we get through any appeal or process.
Hey, Paul, just given everything else that's going on in the U.S. right now, and last time we had you on the podcast, we talked about prediction markets and sweepstakes. And I mean, as I said to Mitch Davidson, we recorded a podcast with Mitch this morning. It seems there's 6 new storylines to prediction markets every day right now. But I just wonder, does that what's going on in the U.S. does that make daily fantasy sports and online poker, is it less attractive to players now, or is there still a lot of appetite, and there's still an opportunity for the market in Ontario now? If this ruling holds and there is an appeal, that this is a good option, and good for operators and for players.
Yeah, I believe that there still is for DFS. I still think it's a market there. I still think that who chooses to offer it, when, and for what. I mean, those are still questions based on again, goes around that the revenue share model and the regulatory regime are a little too onerous for the product, in the sense that it operationally doesn't make sense to enter the Ontario regime the way it's written. And I think, Attorney General Downey was very supportive of the DFS sector when pursuing this question. So we have to see what work can be done to create a really an attractive, competitive regulatory and revenue share regime for them to move forward. And that's bigger than the question. This is sort of part one. Now, the next for DFS, I think it will be what does the Ontario model look like for DFS? I mean, one of the things we won't have predictive markets in most of Canada, partly because of the ban on binary contracts that was done in every province except the British Columbia Securities Commission didn't adopt it. The ruling back in 2017 when it first came in. That's helpful because I think that's again, the struggle U.S. is having, obviously, because you have this federal regulatory body that everybody's using, is creating conflict and confusion. For now, the courts will probably decide what that's going to be. But it's a warning that there's still always new products. And this is the challenge, that there's always going to be something else. And what's the challenge to the regulatory regime coming from? Where's it coming from next? And that's why it's an evolution, right? These regulatory models can't be static anymore. It's not, the gaming market isn't static and simple, and it's always going to be X or it's always going to be Y. It's always going to change. And I think that's where regulators got to become a lot more flexible. I think they have to work together more because some of these challenges are better taken collectively than individually in some cases. So that's what we want to see. But it's a warning. I mean, basically, that the new products, that there is always going to be technology is wonderful thing, and there's a lot of innovators and a lot of people who've got wonderful creative ideas on how to offer new products and new services. So we're gonna have to continue to adapt. And so I think that's what I always take away from this, is that it's a warning that we need to regulatory regime's got to be flexible, and it's always going to be a constant.
When this court decision came out last Wednesday, and we updated the newsletter Wednesday morning once it was handed down, was your inbox flooded, and were you getting bombarded with text messages, or were people not surprised by the ruling?
I think a lot of people didn't quite understand it from the beginning and what was going on, to be blunt. It was having sat through the hearing in the few days in the court. You understand that the detail in which you're getting into is debating words and meaning from the criminal code that was written in the 60s. To all the lawyers, it's sometimes dry and sometimes not always a straight line. But to the credit, it was I learned a lot through that process, I have to say. But an understanding of this is how we build case law in Canada, and I think that this was an important decision for the industry, and understanding it's always good to have reasoning and ration behind decisions, and seeking more modern interpretations of the code.
Yeah, I'll say we'll make sure we include a link to the Substack post with this podcast. Pod. I thought Jeff Saccone did a pretty good job breaking it down, and Jeff spent. I think that story. I think he updated that story 6 or 7 times that day. We had an email exchange on last Friday, and that was a lot of work that day. But I thought Jeff did a really good job spelling it out.
It was a 135, 140 page decision, so there was a lot there.
Yeah, and well, also Dave Briggs will be writing about it in the Wednesday newsletter as well this week. Hey, Paul, we're both on a fairly tight timeline today, so I do want to ask you about a couple of other things. And we since last time we had you on, a couple of things have happened around sports betting advertising, and one. The Canadian Gaming Association announced its code for responsible gaming advertising, which I think is supposed to take effect at the beginning of 2026. Want to talk to you about that. Also, Bill S-211, Senator Marty Deacon's bill to create a national framework on sports betting advertising. It's gone through the Senate now. It has passed first reading in the House of Commons. First off, just any, it seems like, again, talk about slow going, like given everything going on Parliament Hill right now, I just don't know how this bill gets through the House.
Well, that's what the democracy will see. I mean, the members will decide in the coming weeks or months, actually. I'll go back to our advertising code for responsible gambling. It was done in partnership with Ad Standards Canada. As everybody knows, that Ad Standards has a national code for advertising on a larger scale that everybody must adhere to as an advertiser in Canada. And those are in addition to any provincial gaming regulatory rules or even Think TV's code for broadcast television. And so, and Ad Standards is, they've received complaints over ads for gaming over the last 2 years. They put out a report on what they had heard and where the ad complaints were coming from. We did this activity for 2 reasons. One, regulatory standards often, they're words on a page, but what do they mean? And so what we're trying to do with this code is provide examples and meaning. And some of the things in it that we thought were important to be able to explain to the public and understanding why certain things are the way they are in the standards, and by providing examples, but also to take some other measures. In that code, we've asked operators to and made a point of referencing ad standards codes for influencers, that we want them to adhere to the code, because we think that's important for transparency when it comes to using influencers on social media. We also ask that they don't target under 21s on social media. Even though the gambling age is 19, there is no age verification in the social media world. And so the idea was to be more prudent and target above 21s, which a lot of operators do. Some even can stay above 25. And there's other measures around advertising on university campuses and other things like that. So we've tried to not only build off the existing regulatory standards in Canada that are across the provinces, but also looking at some best practices from the industry. And it's a living document that we'll review and we'll update as required, as research helps us guide us in terms of what would be the most prudent activities to undertake and how to do them. And it covers all forms of advertising. So this is the other part that where S-211, and to segue into that, deals with what the federal government control, and that's broadcast, and that's radio and television. And so, our comments around S-211 are quite clear. Whatever it's trying to do is already being done, in our opinion. Not only do we have the provinces have all the tools and controls over gaming advertising that they need, including if they wanted to, they could ban it, which is the federal government actually doesn't have that power. And through the CRTC, and the CRTC, even when they appeared in front of the Senate committee, spoke about ad standards and Think TV and the provincial gaming regulators and the cooperation and work that's gone on. So we see S-211 as really one. We don't talk about sports betting advertising versus lottery advertising or casino advertising. It's all gambling advertising, including charity 50/50s to hospital lotteries. Everything is gambling advertising. And so we've always taken that approach. And so what we said is that it's really best left to the provinces to decide. They have a lot of tools in their toolbox that they can choose to use. S-211 won't deal with offshore illegal wagering. It won't deal with advertising in Ontario showing up in other provinces, because that's our broadcast framework. Those aren't illegal. That's the nature of our broadcast system in Canada. We have national advertising and national broadcasting. So that won't deal with any of that at this stage. So because the broadcasting system is, we've had this kind of advertising available for all segments for decades. So that's why we say it's really redundant. There's other things that we would like to see the federal government, if they want to lean in on things around betting integrity and Canada becoming a signatory to the Macallan Convention on match fixing. We would love to see them do that, and making sure that there's strong protection for athletes when it comes to betting integrity. We've supported the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport and the Canadian Olympic Committee on those endeavors for years now. So we think there are some areas where they can, but this isn't one of them. We think this is actually best left to the provinces. They've had the tools. They've used them for 40 years. Some provinces use more tools than others. That's fine, but the provinces have always had the ability to decide what's best for their jurisdictions. And that's within their control. They can create regulations and laws to be able to control what goes on in their provinces, just like they've done for the last 40 years. And that's where we think it belongs.
Hey, Paul, who, from a CGA standpoint, who was involved in creating this code and, involved in the process of coming up with what you've come up with? And again, we will link to the code on the Substack post, and it is a comprehensive document, as you point out.
Yeah, so we worked with Ad Standards because ultimately they administer this code. They have a program where they have an industry code. There is an industry code for alcohol with Ad Standards that they've had for years, and so we worked with them. We consulted with our members and industry, and so over about 18 months now, we sought input and discussed it internally with the CGA and our board and with members, and sought feedback and something made and created this. And this is, for the CGA members are signing on to. Others are welcome to as well. But we've done this for a purpose of again being transparent, wanting to be open about communication. There was a lot of misinformation in the advertising discussion around gaming with the launch of the Ontario marketplace. And people saying, well, there should be rules and laws. Well, there's lots. And in fact, when you have 3 or 4 codes that, and then there's always, the provinces have ultimate tools. Ontario, they also have the flexibility to change as need be and market dynamics dictate, as Ontario did. And that's why, again, we think this is best left for the provinces.
Ready to accelerate your digital growth? Bead Gaming delivers a market-leading platform with best-in-class products driven by secure, cutting-edge technology. With an open API platform, robust integration suite, and unlimited configurability, you can achieve the ultimate end-to-end customization for your iGaming ambitions. Bead Gaming is your partner for success. Get in touch at beadgaming.com. Hey, Paul, I don't know if the code addresses this or can address this, but the last couple of weeks, I mean, I'm not on social media a ton outside of X because of the work I do, but just on my Instagram feed the last 2 weeks, I've just been bombarded with online casino ads, and an awful lot of them seem to me to be phony. I mean, spelling mistakes. I saw one last week for a Woodbine casino that had a graphic of the Queen's Plate. We haven't had a Queen's Plate now for two years, I think. Is there anything that can be done? And again, this has been a complaint against Meta, the owners of Facebook and Instagram, that they're allowing these fake ads to appear on their sites and that. And is there anything that the code can do or that the CGA can do with this kind of advertising?
Well, one of the things and this is a global problem, and that's where I've been involved with associations across the globe. The International Association of Gaming Regulators has convened a committee to deal with this and deal with the social media platforms because it actually a lot of these ads are for, it's coming back. It kind of pops its head up every now and again when the stealing of land-based casino brands, saying they're online.
Right.
We had warnings from a number of provinces. We referred stuff to the OPP here in Ontario because it started with Niagara Falls and Ram in particular. Were heavily targeted. We found over 100 links to one of the Ram things in one day. The Meta in Canada has started to take action and working with, particularly with the AGCO, but they've been now quite more responsive than they were. But it's a global issue where these ads for a lot of these casinos, basically stealing their IP, and others were originated in Europe and they end up on here. They're not native to Canada creating these things. These are people running sites that are fraudulent in all parts of the world. And so it takes a collective effort. And that's some of the things that we're seeing of greater cooperation, where the platforms need to take licenses and they need to understand the jurisdiction. And we're all for that. And that's what the conversations we've been having, is to better enforce those things, because it is something that the platforms ultimately have control over, and they need to take more responsibility for what they're taking money from, because that's, we said to them, there's a lot of money being spent by regulated operators who are licensed in the provinces. You need to respect that, or else that too could go away.
Yeah, and I think these ads also don't help around the perception that there's too much advertising from the sports betting industry, when for every ad you see from a legal operator, you're getting like 6 or 7 scam/phony ads.
And it's unfortunate, the nature of the internet, and as it's been a massive disruptor to our sector, and that's where we think that the collective effort of creating more regulatory regimes, fully regulated marketplaces, however that may look, in various provinces, will only serve to help that. Ultimately, there could be a decision to amend the criminal code, which is something that I think in time probably needs to be done, because when you look at the code, when it talks about all gaming in Canada is illegal unless, and it's it creates all these exemptions. Well, I'm about flipping that around and saying what's legal and what isn't. And I think that those are the kinds of conversations I think we really need to start talking about, because then you can truly better control and oversight. And I said, because the provinces do have a lot of tools, but we have vague laws, and that's been the problem. And we've known that, and the solutions lie in provinces clarifying those, like Ontario has done, like Alberta's in the process of doing, for their own jurisdictions, to help, one, their local land-based and in local businesses compete on a level playing field, for one, better consumer protection, for two, and then economic benefits that may flow to that province. And at the same time, then you try and get more control of the marketplace, because Ontario did see a lot of sites leave and not target the market anymore, and that continues to happen. But again, it's a case of we have very vague laws in this country that don't give a lot of people a lot of tools to work with.
Speaking of exemptions, the Canadian Gaming Associations let it be known that you're seeking one from the cash limits included in a border bill that's awaiting passage in the House of Commons. Can you shine a little bit more light on that for us?
Oh, for sure. It was a bit of a surprise to us. Back in 2023, the Department of Finance started a consultation as part of the 5-year review of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Financial Terrorism Act. Talking about banning cash transactions over $10,000 was not part of that consultation. We gave them a whole very, very robust submission on where we thought that the AML regime could be improved as related to gaming, to create a more effective and efficient model. The industry does phenomenal work in this space and has continued to improve every day in what they do and how they do it. And a lot of the policies in every province far and exceed any of the FinTech requirements around sourcing of funds, KYC customers, all those cash handling policies. It's very difficult to get a check, if not impossible for a lot of people to get a check out of a casino. In many cases, they'll segment your cash when it comes in. They'll give it back to you if you didn't, if you want to cash out. And so that's, there's a lot of tools, and cash is still part of a currency, and people like to use it. And we don't think the government has really thought through the impact of this type of decision. Putting real time, having to monitor play in a 24-hour period, which means real-time monitoring of play. Operational impacts to casinos are significant and costly. Their 12-month implementation is virtually impossible for our sector to do. If we have to do this, we don't think it's the right decision. We don't think they've done a risk assessment. And that's just from the gaming sector. And we're part of the AML regime. This is the other part. We're seeking, there is provisions in C2 now. It was also included in the budget and may end up in a budget implementation bill and another bill this week. We're not sure. So we'll wait and see what that says. But we're just saying that there's, the assessment on the broader economy too. This affects a lot of other sectors, but we're part of the AML regime. We'd like an exemption. There was provisions for that in C2. We don't know if they're going to still exist or not. Partly because of that, the policies in the gaming sector and the land-based businesses in this country far and exceed the FinTrack requirements. And we're a very strong reporter, but also on a risk assessment, if you're trying to launder large sums of money, the casino is not the place. You're not anonymous. There's lots of cameras. You have to present ID. There's lots of other rules over and above. And we've warned them. We said, well, how much of this money is going to end up in the crypto space that you don't regulate properly? How much is going to end up in other places? And have you really thought it through? And that's where we're going to continue to push that. We've met with, the opposition leader. We've met with finance, the minister's office. We've met with others, and we're continuing to say, what we'd really like you to do is do an overhaul of the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Financial Terrorism Act to bring in a better regime. Because Canada's AML regime doesn't mention sports betting. It doesn't include horse racing. It is very cumbersome and it's very complex, the way it's been created, with provincial crowns being the reporting entities and operators having to feed through a third party. There is lots that can be improved, and we'd like them to focus on that.
Hey, Paul, before we let you go, since the last time we had you on the podcast, there's been betting scandals / messes, whatever you want to call it, within the National Basketball Association, Major League Baseball, and UFC. And, I could ask you 1,000 questions on what we've seen happen over the last 4 weeks, but just get your general thoughts on what's going on right now and what you're seeing and what are there solutions here, or just your general thoughts?
Well, as I see it, it's disappointing. It's disappointing that as professional athletes, the work and the effort it takes to get to that level, the privilege that comes with playing at that level, let alone the economic benefits. It's disappointing that they still feel that this is still a conversation. I would have expected we went through a few. I thought that would have, been a nice warning sign to everybody that, hey, guess what? You're going to get caught. And that's the reality. Is this is what the system was designed to do. You're going to get caught. If there were no gaming regulators in any state jurisdiction or betting operators requiring to provide, we may not know about a lot of this stuff, but because there are, people are getting caught, and we'll find out. And that's a warning to any athlete. It's like, just stop and think about it for a minute. You will get found out. And because it's not an exercise that one person can do and benefit greatly from themselves. Usually match fixing is often cases in multi-jurisdictional in terms of whether the match occurs, where the bets occur, and all the rest. And that's where the system is designed, with the betting integrity monitors, with robust technology and the requirements of book operators to monitor their players, their account holders, especially if they're athletes and they've been identified as a person of interest. They need to understand. And I heard this when it started with Shane Pinto and NHL players. Well, how do they find out? It's your phone, guy. They know where you are. It's not hard to figure out. Like, you have an account with your name. And that's just the reality. And it's disappointing that no one's continue to learn the lesson over and over again, and it's unfortunate. And the industry will respond. I mean, we've seen what Major League Baseball is doing, NBA in their cases. I think it's the responsiveness and the reactive to measures are important, and the industry stepping up and doing that with their league partners. But ultimately, you can't regulate stupidity.
Nope. Well put. Let's leave it there. That's Paul Burns, the president and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association. Paul, always grateful for your time, and we'll look forward to getting you back on the podcast before we turn the calendar at the end of December.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve.
That's it for this episode of the Gaming News Canada show. As always, you can find us on Substack at gamingnewscanada.ca on the various podcast platforms, and you can also watch this interview with Paul Burns on our YouTube channel. Thanks again to Paul Burns for joining us today, and we will see everybody again very soon.